Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's now 2 o'clock and I am resuming the part 2 preliminary meeting. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Maund in just a few seconds. The applicant, so Mr. Philpott and Mr. Rhodes, I said I would just write down what my understanding is of what your offer is on the soft coastal defence feature and the hard coastal defence feature. My understanding of what you're proposing is that in April you will be receiving and sharing with stakeholders one-dimensional modelling of the soft coastal defence feature, and also engineering design and some notes in relation to that for the hard coastal defence feature, and you would propose to submit those to the examination if they're relevant, if we're in that scenario, at the next available deadline. And then on June the 20th, you're expecting to receive operational modelling for the soft coastal defence feature, and you would submit that also at the next available deadline. So I think it's pretty straightforward. Have I correctly understood what you're proposing?
So yes, I think the only subtlety is in terms of the submission to what have been described as the stakeholders, those with whom we're directly engaged on these matters, and then submission to the examination. I think that the idea is that we will seek to get agreement if we can in relation to those, and as I think Mr. Rhodes put it, only topping and tailing, and then put it into the examination. Hopefully that will allow for it to be the next available deadline, but I think we just have to see exactly when that is. But your overall summary of the position is right, subject to that just small caveat.
Okay. Thank you. And then let me just ask you this. June the 20th, for your operational modelling of the soft defences, now that is just 3 days after what is currently deadline 3 on the 17th of June. So you wouldn't be able to hit that. The next deadline is Friday the 23rd July, which is quite a long way past that June date. Just to float an idea, which I haven't had the opportunity of discussing with my fellow examining inspectors, but just to float an idea, would it help if we set another deadline between those two dates, so that you can submit the operational modelling at that point?
So the indication I'm getting is yes, that would be helpful. Clearly, there'll be a need, as I've indicated in relation to the other matters, to build in a reasonable opportunity to have a bit of backwards and forwards with the interested parties with whom we're discussing those matters actively. But subject to allowing time for that, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. And you'll have heard, I think it's just for me to draw your attention, you've heard what the Environment Agency have been saying about the sort of information which they feel is necessary. At the moment, that's something for the two of you to discuss and to work out. You'll also have heard Mr. Sanders and the points which he makes, which is that as an interested party with some expertise, I don't know how young or old his expertise is, Mr. Sanders, and I'm not. I hope you don't mind me saying that. But other interested parties are saying, well, why can't we see it as well? And maybe that goes to your question of how long you take before it actually goes into the examination. The other is how wide it is appropriate to throw the net. But I just remind you that those things have been said by other people.
Thank you. So we've got a note of that, and we'll give consideration to how far it should be distributed before it goes to the examination.
Very good. Thank you. I see two hands up on this. so I'm a little bit surprised about it. We've talked quite a lot about it, but let me take Miss Downs. Your hand, I think, went up early.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Brock. Just to reiterate, there are many interested parties who are really anxious to see this information, including people who spent many hundreds of hours scrutinising EDF's documentation provided, including under Freedom of Information requests on coastal processes. So not only would I urge the applicant to share this information at the earliest opportunity, but also for the examining authority to ensure that there's sufficient time between that information being shared and any issue-specific hearing on coastal processes for full scrutiny of that, because obviously we're not going to have this information by deadline 2 for written representations.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Scott, your hand has also been up for a short while.
Yes, thank you. Just to ask you, I've got another timetable question which hangs over from the previous session about Reese timetabling. And I just want to know whether you were going to take that.
We've got your submission in relation to that, Mr. Scott, and it will be taken into account in the decision, the Rule 8 letter, which comes out very shortly. Right.
And could I just add the comment that part of the reason I'm interested, or other people will be interested, is that there is an EROPI issue which is already on the agenda. And it strikes me that is so strategic that there is a question about, when that would be timetabled. And obviously that would be a major component of the Reese report, which is open to consultation. So yes. I'm curious about the timetabling interconnection of those two issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Councillor Fellows, I see your hand is up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brock. Ladies and gentlemen, Councillor Marianne Fellows on behalf of Aldeburgh Town Council. I would endorse what Ms. Downs has said, that this should be in the public domain, not just between certain interested parties. It should be completely in the public domain on the PINS website, to allow independent review, but also to build trust and confidence of all parties in the process. Secondly, I'd like to remind us all that there's also a consequence that should the modelling prove not viable or without adverse effect on coastal processes, then it means it changes the transport mix. So the applicant has said the whole reason they're doing the beach landing facility, for example, is to change the transport mix to 60% land and 40% rail and sea. Now, if rail and sea are not viable through the modelling that occurs once the examination process has started, then we have to go back and change again all the transport issues that are related to volume of traffic and a number of HGVs to bring certain materials that might otherwise come by sea. So that was my point, really. And thank you very much for your careful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words. Very good. I am now going to hand over to Mr. Maund, who is going to deal with some other aspects of the timetable. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, but I have noticed that Mr. Wilson has his hand up. Can I just clarify, Mr. Wilson, is it a point that you're wishing to make on the elements that have just been discussed?
Yes, it was. It was just a quick point, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's just on the timetabling, because obviously if the modelling, sorry, the modelling will come in way after the written reps have to go in. So how much time would be allowed once that modelling's come in and all the further information comes in? So as far as the timetable goes, how long will we have to actually respond to that? Because obviously we're getting way into the possible examination period. And it was just a sort of a question of timetabling, really.
Okay, thank you. We'll have to consider that to make sure it fits together. Mr. Brock, are you wanting to say something further?
Yes, sorry, I am.
No, you said what I was going to say.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll move on to the next topic. Mr. Wilson, if you can switch your camera off, thank you. Okay. Just now going on to the topic of hearings. Currently, as drafted, the timetable has dates for open floor hearings from the 19th to the 21st of May, and further dates, if required, provisionally for the 24th to the 27th of August and the 14th to the 17th of September. We've also made a suggestion that we would consider holding evening sessions if that were to be helpful. Now, I note to date that no one has requested that, but that's obviously still a possibility. I'm also aware that a number of interested parties have expressed concern that there does not appear to be sufficient time to allow all parties the opportunity to speak, and we are mindful of the importance of this. Issue-specific hearings currently scheduled for the 6th to the 9th of July and the 13th to the 16th of July, and with draft reserve dates for the 24th to the 27th of August and the 14th to the 17th of September. The applicant has requested that the issue-specific hearing on coastal processes not take place before or on the dates for the 24th to the 27th of August, I think because of the consultants' availability, and Environment Agency, Natural England and East Suffolk Council have asked for a delay for this topic to be covered later in the examination. And I just ask whether the Environment Agency and Marine Management Organisation have any further comments to make at this stage on those points. If I come to the Environment Agency first.
Good afternoon again, sir. It's Simon Barlow from the Environment Agency, Sizewell Sea Project Manager. No, not really. I mean, the obvious target probably for an issue-specific hearing on coastal processes would be that latter date period between the 14th and 17th September, because that is probably the earliest we will have had any opportunity to have concluded review of this information that is to be submitted in June, and the totality of that which has been presented in combination through these next few steps. So yeah, I mean, we asked for it to be pushed towards the end of the examination. That would appear to be a timescale that would support it.
Okay, thank you. And the Marine Management Organisation?
Hello, Luella Williamson for the Marine Management Organisation here. We too would endorse having the coastal geomorphology meetings or hearings later on into the examination timetable. So endorsing what Simon Barlow said there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if I now can come to Mr. Tate at East Suffolk Council.
Thank you, sir. Andrew Tate, East Suffolk Council. Yes, sir. The council also suggested that coastal processes should be dealt with towards the end of the examination period. However, if it is only dealt with at that point, it may be too late to deal with any outstanding issues. So one matter we would ask you to consider is whether there would be benefit in having a hearing on this matter at the earlier session. I understand the applicant's expert can't be available in August, so in July, so that some of the main issues can be ventilated at that point before coming to deal with it finally in September. So that's our concern as to whether or not by leaving it to the very end, there won't be time to pick up any problems or issues that arise.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barlow, you've raised your hand. Have you got something to come back on?
Only that I would endorse that is a very sensible and precautionary approach. There will probably be some initial viewpoints that we can share on the initial 1D modelling that has been provided and our emerging positions, and that could very helpfully potentially shape the further work that might be necessary to support a final issue-specific hearing further down the road. So actually there is some logic to that, as long as we've had adequate time to prepare useful contributions to that period.
Right, thank you. I note Alison Downs' hand is raised.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mond. I'm just referring back to my previous comment. If we don't receive this information until after the 20th of June deadline, and there's an issue-specific hearing in July, it will seriously disadvantage any participation by unimportant interested parties in such a discussion. With the greatest respect to other organisations who I understand obviously hold the expertise in this, but it should not prevent other interested parties from full and active participation in these discussions. And I think it will, it will prejudice our ability to take part in any subsequent discussion later on in the examination. So I do understand the logic. I'm deeply concerned that we will be disadvantaged from participating in a meaningful way. And I would urge you to consider perhaps extending the examination or delaying the start of the examination, or indeed making it possible to hold subsequent discussions far enough down the line so that everybody is able to take part on a level playing field as far as that is possible.
Thank you. Just before I move on, just see if there's anyone else with a raised hand. Mr. Bedford, on behalf of Suffolk County.
Thank you, sir. Michael Bedford, Suffolk County Council. So as you know, we defer to East Suffolk Council on coastal process matters because they are the relevant authority with the expertise. But just to draw to your attention, I know you won't have overlooked it, but we have at item 6, then little Roman 6 and little Roman 7 of our procedural deadline B submission, made the same point about the benefits of having, as it were, an early rehearsal of the coastal process matters at the July issue-specific hearings, even noting that there is clearly going to be a need for those topics to be revisited. And the reason why I simply stress those points is because it echoes the point I think raised by Councillor Fellows a moment ago, that there is obviously a knock-on consequence for the wider transportation issues, which we will be expecting to deal with at those earlier issue-specific hearings, if it became the case that the beach landing facility and therefore the amount of freight that could be delivered by sea were to be materially different to the position, depending obviously again on the permutations as to what you decide about the changes, etc., etc. But so it's just to echo that point that there is a benefit in having an early canter, as it were, at the issue, as well as a more detailed scrutiny in due course.
Yeah, thank you. Rosie Sutherland.
Thank you, sir. It was just a short point to flag a concern. I'm afraid at the moment I haven't necessarily thought of a suitable solution to put forward. Again, just going back to the information that is going to be provided by the applicant in April and I think June or July to do with the coastal defences, there could be implications depending on what the information says to do with some of the ecological concerns. So it's particularly important in relation to the SAC, but also the site of special scientific interest. And forgive me for not remembering which council it was, but I think one of the councils has recommended that the natural environment and ecological concerns is dealt with in that July issue-specific hearing. So for now, please could I just flag that more may need to be considered once that coastal defences information has come in and any further implications identified. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Now, there's no further hands raised at this point, so I'll just move on.
Do you want to hear from me?
I shall do. I was going to move on to some other points, but I'm quite happy to hear from you now. That's fine.
All I would say, sir, if it's helpful and timely, is that we can see the sense in having an early consideration of the issues in relation to coastal defences, as well as an issue-specific hearing later in the examination. We think that there is indeed a logic to that, and we think that that would be helpful. So if it assists you to know that we endorse that suggestion, then I wish to make that clear.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, I'll move on then. Suffolk Constabulary have also indicated that they would not wish the issue-specific hearings on social economics and community safety to be held during August because of constraints on their available time. I hadn't intended to ask a question about that of them, but just to make everyone aware that that was a request that they'd made. Equally, the Marine Management Organisation have asked us to consider putting marine matters to be dealt with together to assist them. Now, at this point, I'd just like to hear from any other parties as to whether they have any additional points or questions regards to the timing and arrangements for the specific hearings. So I'll open that to the floor. I'll start with the councils, if I may. If I come to East Suffolk Council first.
Thank you, sir. No, Andrew Tate for East Suffolk. So nothing additional from us. You'll have seen that the back of our deadline B submission, we have made a number of suggestions as to issue-specific hearings, and they are identical to those made by Suffolk County Council here twice. But I think that should be self-explanatory, so I have nothing to add in relation to that.
It is. May I ask though, at this point, I think that you, and I hope I'm not confusing the councils, but the suggested potentially additional further reserve dates for issue-specific hearings. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, if it's felt that our list is of a length that doesn't necessarily fit into the timescale you allotted, then that would flow from that. So yes, that's correct.
And did you have in mind any particular dates for those, and how they might be fitted within to the timetable?
No, sir. I think the only suggestion was that they would potentially appear earlier in the timetable rather than later in the timetable. But beyond that, we haven't got any specific dates to mention.
Okay, and I take it that, well, I'll ask the county them as well. So if I can go to the Suffolk County Council, I assume that your view is similar as you're working together.
So Michael Bedford, Suffolk County Council. Yes, indeed, and as you've seen, we've got the same, effectively, appendix to our procedural deadline B submission with the same points being made. And you will also see that in terms of timetabling, that we've given indications there as to where certain things could be dealt with earlier or later in the light of various matters as they're set out. We have also, as you will have seen, there's been a dialogue between the two councils about the AONB issue, and obviously it's clearly subject to your overall decision, but we have essentially jointly suggested to you a way of, in a sense, satisfying both councils' concerns about that topic, which is again a bit of a, as it were, deal with it at one stage, but then also deal with it at a later stage to ensure that all elements are picked up. So I just sort of remind you of that aspect. And then the only other point, I say we haven't descended to the detail of offering you specific dates, but it is a point that was raised at the part 1 preliminary meeting, both orally and indeed in some of the representations made to deadline A, where we certainly stressed that there may be a need for further issue-specific hearings, but we also put forward the plea that for practical logistical personnel management reasons, we were quite keen to ensure that there are at least some periods in your timetable when parties can be free to know that they could be, as it were, taking annual leave, which is even more perhaps important this year than in other years. And we wouldn't want, as it were, to see between the devil and the deep blue sea, as it were, the desire for extra issue-specific hearings to adversely impact on that separate plea for, I say, what we think is understandable personnel management reasons. So that's the only additional points that we would make. Obviously, it's a difficult exercise for you to juggle those competing considerations, and we empathise with that.
No, it's understood. Thank you for that. Are there any other interested parties who would wish to make any additional comments that haven't already been made? Mr. Barlow again from the Environment Agency.
So yes, Simon Barlow, Environment Agency. Yeah, just to draw your attention, excuse me, to our contribution we made to procedural deadline A. Excuse me, just need to clear my throat again. Whereby we set out, in our view, those areas where there were some principal issues that could potentially benefit by an issue-specific hearing to more properly draw out the issues that we need to contribute evidence to you on. And we particularly mentioned those areas on which there were still significant work to go, which in their own right would potentially bring them to a material level for issue-specific hearing purposes. And those were, we've already rehearsed a great deal today, coastal processes, but we've also obviously referred previously to water supply. There are some substantial issues on marine ecology still to be discussed, and there are some latent issues on flood risk. We think we would benefit from there being opportunities to contribute to those in issue-specific hearing terms, but also that we should try and pull together all the relevant issues that are appropriate to those discussions into the one issue-specific hearing, so as to focus our time and attention on those.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Barlow's hand was the last one to raise, so no, Alison Downs.
Thank you, Mr. Maund. I've heard a number of interested parties, say that the August dates are giving them some difficulties. I mean, an organisation like mine, as you will have heard this morning, is representing significant numbers of people. And, I'm just wondering, in terms of the sort of level playing field, to what extent our own or the commitments of individuals taking part in this process are able to influence your decision about whether or not to hold issue-specific hearings during August. Again, it sort of speaks to the timetable of the examination as a whole, the difficulties of holding it over the summer. As counsel for the council has said, holidays are going to be even more important this year than ever before. So I would again just reiterate that this is further argument for delaying the start of the examination and potentially extending the period of the examination to allow people the opportunity to participate fully throughout.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, if there's no further parties, I'll just finally come back to the applicant to see if there's any further comments you'd wish to raise or make.
Thank you. So we're very much alive to the fact that this is an issue for you and your colleagues as to how many issue-specific hearings you want and the topics they should cover, and don't seek to influence you on that. Happy for you to take a view. The only point we've identified about when they should be held and the subject matter is the one we've dealt with in writing, which you've alluded to. So there's nothing arising from what's been said I need to respond to. So
thank you very much. Okay, so I'll now come to hand over to my colleague, Mrs. Cassini, to deal with the. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I just ought to make one further point regarding the potential for compulsory acquisition hearings. They're scheduled for the 17th to the 20th of August at the moment. we haven't received any direct comment with regard to those. So assuming that that's still the case, and just see if anyone has any specific points that would wish to make about the compulsory acquisition hearings. Councillor Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Maud. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Councillor Marianne Fellows on behalf of Marlborough Town Council. I'm often asked to include a bit of a wider picture response to, because many other parish and town councils haven't been able to engage at this point. I would say that if we're talking about compulsory acquisition hearings and agreeing those dates, that's quite strange again when there may be more interested parties and more people subject to compulsory acquisition if the changes are included. So again, not knowing when precisely you'll make your decision on that, it may be that they need additional dates. And also this also applies to open floor hearings and, again, as I've said, issue specific hearings, because we haven't agreed the changes. We don't know if these may need to be altered. Thank you.
No, that's understood. Thank you. Okay, so I think I can now move on to my colleague Mrs. Cassini, who's going to deal with the subject of site visits, site inspections. Thank you.
Thank you. As we discussed in preliminary meeting part 1, where access to private land is required or the examining authority require interested parties to be present to guide them or to point out certain features, an accompanied site visit will be arranged. For practical reasons, including the current COVID-19 restrictions, number of attendees may be limited and ultimately numbers in attendance are at the discretion of the examining authority. With this in mind, could I ask if interested parties could give thought to the nomination of a possible representative or representatives who would be best served to attend? If you could provide these details by deadline 1, which is the 12th of May, in a draft timetable as it currently stands, we would be grateful. It's also important to stress at this point that attendance on site is also dependent on landowners granting access. The conduct and timings of site inspections are also at the discretion of the examining authority. Unlike hearings, verbal communication between the examining authority and interested parties at the site inspection is strictly limited to matters of fact, such as ensuring we're in the right location on a site. We may also ask parties to point out features of the site for purposes of factual clarification only. Such site visits are not an opportunity for anyone to approach the examining authority and discuss the proposed development or its merits. The applicant's draft itinerary for the accompanied site inspections was submitted at procedural deadline B and is available on the project website to view. Several additional suggested locations for the accompanied site visit have also been submitted at procedural deadline B, which we have noted, and these are also on the project website. Comments on the applicant's draft itinerary and the submission of any further suggested locations for site inspections with justification is required by deadline 1. If interested parties wish to submit suggested locations, please include information such as a plan or a photograph if you think this would be useful. In respect of the request to visit Hinkley Point C, we would like the applicant to arrange this if possible. We do acknowledge that due to current COVID restrictions, such a visit may not take place until later in the examination. As with other accompanied site inspections, if it is possible to arrange a visit to Hinkley, this will not be an opportunity to discuss the proposed development or its merits. Please can I ask that the applicant give thought to the logistics of such a visit, specifically the need to ensure that representatives of interested parties are also able to attend. Could I therefore request that the applicant liaises with the host authorities, parish and town councils, and Together Against Sizewell C and Stop Sizewell C in respect of any representatives of such a visit, and provide an update by deadline 1. At this point, I'd like to hear from parties as to whether they have any additional points regarding arrangements for site inspections. I'll start with the councils and other interested parties before asking the applicant to respond, please. Either of the councils have anything they wish to add?
Andrew Tate for East Suffolk. No, we've got nothing to add at this stage. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you.
I could say the same, Madam. Michael Bedford, Suffolk County Council, nothing to add.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up. Oh, sorry, I do. Alison Downs.
Sorry, I was waiting for the councils to say their piece. Just to say that it's good to hear that you want to go to Hinkley Point, and in deadline 1 we'll make suggestions for local people who could show you other aspects of the impact of the development down there. And if it's appropriate, you know, a representative from this area, I'm sure would be available to accompany you as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Collins, your hand is up as well.
Yeah, just a piece of clarification, if you can. And I did note that the applicant has put in a draft itinerary and schedule of places that you should visit. Is it down to us to suggest people who should accompany those visits? I wasn't clear on the fact that whether accompaniment was possible where it was public land as opposed to private land. So if you could just clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
I will clarify. We'll clarify that for you, Mr. Collins. Thank you. Is there anybody else with their hand up? I don't see anything. Does the applicant have anything they wish to add at this point?
No, Madam. Just to say that we've taken a note of what you'd like in relation to Hinkley Point C, and we'll seek to liaise with those parties and come back to you at deadline 1 as requested.
Thank you, Mr. Philpott. No more hands are up, so I will now hand back to Miss Mackay.
Are there any outstanding points that have not yet been covered that anyone wishes to raise under agenda item 10? That is the examining authority's consideration of the procedural deadline B submissions. If there are, if you could put your hand up now. I've got no response to that. So in that case, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 11, any procedural decisions taken by the examining authority. So before we do so, we will take a break to enable us to deliberate on our procedural decision in relation to the written and oral submissions that have been made at the preliminary meeting, seeking the deferral of the start of the examination, and will also provide updates in relation to the initial assessment of principal issues and statements of common ground. So we'll adjourn now for half an hour, and that will be until 3:10.